welcome to Design Notes. I'm Liam Spradlin, and this week I talked to illustrator and designer Virginia Poltrack. Virginia has built designs and experiences for fingertips, wrists, and eyes that feature awesome interactions and beautiful hand-drawn artwork. We talked about the relationship between art and technology, the creative process, what it's like to be a freelancer, and some of the experiences of women in tech. Let's get started. Hey, Virginia. I'm really excited to have you on this week.
Thanks for having me. Liam, I have to say, for everyone that's listening, Liam is one of my design heroes. So I feel a little bit like I should be like, Liam, tell us about your creative process. Tell us about what inspires you. Like, I would like to pick your brain for, design and creative questions, but that's very diplomatic of you, and thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm sure that there are plenty of listeners right now who are using your watch faces, and
I hope so. If you're not, go get them. They're in the Play Store.
So, all right, I guess speaking of which, wearables, you are very invested in the wearable scene. I know you're a glass explorer and you make awesome watch faces. So I guess I want to get your thoughts on just wearables in general and where they are now, where they're headed, what you think about them.
It's so funny, though, I have to tell you that I'm obviously super invested in wearables now, and we're using them a lot and building stuff for them. But honestly, I think up until I got glass, I honestly did not like technology. Like I used it as little as possible, and I was very against it because I think I felt like, with all this stuff, there's like a right way to do it, and if you're not doing it that way, then it's wrong. And then glass came along and they were like, well, we don't even know, like, use it, see what happens. And I thought, well, now that I can support. I like that attitude. So glass was sort of a big turning point for me personally, and the watches as well. But I think that I don't think that glass is dead. I think there are, use cases today that are like medical, all these sort of different applications that people are using, and it's really helping people. So we may not see the consumer side of that for some time, but I don't know. I get frustrated when people sort of speak badly about it just because I'm still a fan. And I see it as like a tool, like a pencil or a paintbrush, right? Like, to me, glass is a tool. And if there's an appropriate case for me using it, then I will. So right. I can't see myself not using it anytime soon. I'm a big fan.
Yeah. And yeah, you're right. The approach that Google took to kind of developing glass was super interesting because they were just very upfront and very open about the fact that they were not sure where this was going to go, but they had a pretty good idea for an interface and
right.
just wanted people to go use it and figure out what it was for, which is awesome.
See, and I like that too. It's like this corporate honesty, right? Like, I don't know, let's see what happens. Let's try it. And I'm a big fan of that, as opposed to like everything is behind closed doors. We're not sort of letting anybody in on the process. Here's the finished thing. And, these are the use cases. I'm much more of a fan of like, we don't know, go crazy. I like that.
And I think my sense is that they got an overwhelming amount of data because I feel like Android Wear learned a lot of lessons from the glass experience. And I feel like, we know that they are working on glass secretly now with the findings that they gathered, whether it's going to be geared more towards enterprise or it's going to come back to consumers. We don't know, but I feel like they got tons of really cool information from that. So yeah, I guess...
That's an excellent point, though. And I have to wonder, like, I would love to be in some of those conversations at Google, like, well, look at what these guys did, right? Like, what were the private conversations about some of the things that happened? We may never know, but I bet they were interesting.
Yeah, for sure. I'm excited to see it come back, personally.
Me too.
I think something like glass will inevitably become commonplace. So I think one barrier too is probably just technology, like integrating the technology in as seamless a way as possible.
True. And I think to look at all of the, let me back up a minute. Like a few years ago, right, there was just glass, but now you see like all these different companies developing some sort of glass product in some version or iteration And I think that there are so many companies doing it that it's not going to go away, because it's no longer something that you can just say, oh, that's, Google's strange side project. Like, it's here, and I'm excited to see what happens with it.
Right. So, and I guess going back to the point about your kind of adopting technology with your art, the relationship between art and technology. So I feel like you've done an excellent job of bringing your art that you handcraft with pens and pencils and paper to the digital world. So what do you think about the role of art and illustration in digital interfaces and how those two kind of interact?
Well, thank you for that. First of all, I appreciate it. And that is sort of funny too, because again, it was just kind of an accident. I wish I could say I had some very well thought out plan of, here's what I'm going to do next. And I didn't happen that way. I was just like, let's see what happens. I'm going to make some stuff and see what works and what doesn't. But it's sort of funny, again, that I went from, really disliking technology to doing all this sort of, I don't want to say cutting edge stuff, but there's not a lot of people in this space. And of the people in this space, I think even less of them are creatives. So it's, I don't know. Sometimes I feel like, oh, geez, if I was really going off course though, like I would hope that someone would correct me, but I don't feel like there's, I don't know how to explain it. Like, yes, there are best practices in place for things like notifications and building an app and what should it look like. But at the same time, a lot of it is still so new that I feel like I'm sort of just learning as I go, which is okay. I guess there's nothing wrong with that.
Right. So I guess also just translating your like physical illustrations to digital, what is that process like?
Oh, so that is, I should say that it's very painstaking and I put a lot of effort into it. And I do, but I also make Adobe Illustrator do most of the work. So thank goodness for software. But yeah, basically with almost all of the watch faces and a lot of the illustrations, I'll do them in ink and scan them and then just place them in Adobe Illustrator. And there's a tool which you know about called Live Trace. And I'll sort of adjust those settings back and forth until I get something that I'm happy with. And then the end product is basically digital and vector, so I can edit it really easily, which is good, especially if I make a mistake. It's not like it's on paper and I have to start over, so it's much more forgiving that way. But yeah, basically everything that is out there that I've made right now started with a pen drawing. So I kind of like that though, right? Like I stayed true to my traditional roots, I guess.
Yeah, software is definitely much more forgiving than physical media usually.
It really is. And then I insisted on not using it for years because I was stubborn and silly.
I think I was the same way coming from, because my history with Adobe products actually started off with photos and using Photoshop to retouch and everything. So of course that was the first place that I went when I started exploring like interfaces and stuff. And I just did not want to use Illustrator because I was not used to it.
Are you serious? So would
yeah.
you say that now, like you primarily work in Illustrator now, correct?
Yeah, definitely.
And now I'm use Illustrator for everything, and if I have to use Photoshop, I'm like, ugh, I don't want to use anything else. It feels like going
back to the dark ages.
It does. It really does. If I had to pick one, and like this is the only piece of software you can use forever, it's Illustrator.
And there are a lot of companies making kind of new design software now. So there's Sketch and Affinity and just kind of an explosion of new design tools. Have you explored those at all?
I haven't, but I think that this is excellent because honestly, anyone that's had to deal with Adobe products, and I don't mean to pick on them, I really don't. I use them every day, but it is not an inexpensive investment. Which is prohibitive to a lot of people, which I don't like. So I think that it's a good thing to have more apps or software out there for more people to use, and hopefully they can be priced more competitively. And I've seen a lot of things come out too that are really, I think they're innovative and they really take people's workflow into consideration. So I'm excited to see that continue.
Yeah, and Adobe subscription is definitely a big investment. And I know that, for example, Sketch, I think I got it for like $49 when it was on sale or something. So that's
That's it. Which is, I mean, you can't even compare that to trying to buy Illustrator.
right, and it's very light. Like the files are very lightweight and fast, and yeah, it's just good to see more innovation in general. And I know Adobe just announced a new prototyping tool called Comet recently too, so that's exciting too. I think the more gears that are turning in that direction, the better.
I agree completely. I know for years I would use, older models of the Creative Suite, which would work to a point, but then you run into problems with like somebody has a newer version and they send you a file and you can't edit it very well. And I mean, there are workarounds for this, but it's not an ideal solution. So yeah, I think that if there was, competitive pricing on this, that would be a good thing for everybody.
Right. And so, speaking of software, I guess getting into just being a designer in general, the creative process. I feel like everybody has a different creative process, so I want to hear about yours.
Oh, my creative process. It might not be that exciting because this is how I generally operate. So, okay, I have projects that I'm working on for, different things. People have hired me to make stuff, but at least once a day I always try and make something that is just for fun, that doesn't just whatever I want to do. So most of the time, I can't think of anything clever. So I would just make myself draw like a bird or an owl or a Star Wars character because it's almost less about what I'm making and just making myself make something. Because I think it's very much like training yourself creatively to do the work. Every once in a while I will get lucky and I will see something and I'll think, oh, I would love to draw that, and I'm going to use these materials and draw it this way and use this as an application for it. I wish that happened every day, but it definitely doesn't. Sadly, because it's fun when that happens, honestly, but I don't think I have that much control over it. And then every once in a while, I'll just have an idea pop into my head like, oh, I should draw a robot or, whatever. I don't know. But I would say it's like 10% being inspired by something and like 90% just making myself do the work, which doesn't sound very glamorous, but that's what usually happens.
Yeah, no, it's definitely relatable. And I know that whenever people will ask me for advice on how to get started designing things or making things, I basically just say, think of something that you want to do and then do it all the way through.
Yeah, honestly, I agree with that. But do you find that that is similar to what you do? Like, in other words, are you like once a day, do you see something and you're like, oh my gosh, that's amazing, I'm gonna build that or do that? Or is it not that often that happens to you, and do you find yourself mostly just sort of making yourself do the work, if that makes sense?
I feel like most of the time for me, I joke about having like 1,000 back burners. So for me, most of the time it's like longer term projects that I'll adopt and then chipping away on those. So I try to work on something that's just mine, at least once a day.
I
But
like that. I agree
it's
with that.
usually like ongoing for many months.
Do you know what else is odd though, in that vein? Like, let me give you an example. My sister-in-law's husband's little sister is getting married, and so she emailed me because she needed save the date cards. And she's lovely, and I was very excited to work on them. And so she sent me an email with a picture and said, here's the information, here's what we want. And again, this is not something I think I have any control over, but I saw it and I just thought, oh, I can do that really easily and that makes sense. And I know exactly what to do. And I literally sat down and did it. And like an hour later, it was completely finished and she loved it and it was perfect. But like, that is not what usually happens. So in other words, it's like there's a ton of research, there's a ton of ideas, there's a ton of false starts, there's a ton of that's not working out, right? So I don't know, it's just weird how some things happen that easily and other things don't.
Yeah, I definitely feel that way about interfaces sometimes. There are times when you'll hear, here's what this feature needs to do, or here's what the user needs to do. And then something will just come to mind immediately, like some kind of approach or paradigm or something will just pop into mind. And then once I start working on it, I'll either find like, oh, it turns out that this is actually a pretty good idea. Like, here's some reasons why this works, but then I'll uncover 10 or 20 reasons why it doesn't work,
No.
and things that need to be kind of like dug around and things like that. So it definitely goes both ways.
I agree with that. I wish I had more control over that, but again, I think it's just sort of, I don't know what it is, actually. I wish I had a better way to verbalize it. Like, sometimes I can just see it in my mind and I know exactly how to get there, and sometimes I don't, and it's a little more of a struggle.
Yeah, I think that's something artists have been trying to figure out for thousands of years now.
Yeah, I agree with
Where
that.
does that come from?
Or like, I can see it in my head this way, but it doesn't look like that on the paper, and how do I reconcile that?
Right. So, and I guess leading off of that, freelancing. So yeah, like getting all these different kinds of assignments and all these different ideas, and kind of, I guess, not only compartmentalizing those into separate projects and thinking about them differently, depending on what project it is, but also just balancing all of those. Like, what is your approach to freelancing?
That's a good question. I think that one thing that I really like is having a bunch of different projects and a bunch of different applications and I guess sort of use cases, because for me, I really like having to, like, okay, I worked on this print item for an hour and let me switch gears and look at a watch face. Because for me, if I stare at something too long, I think I start making mistakes and they get harder to recognize, if that makes sense. So like, if I go do something else for an hour and come back to it, I'll say, oh, here's exactly what I need to do. I don't know why I didn't realize that sooner. Right, so I really like being able to sort of jump around on different stuff. I have found, and I know other freelancers that work from home that joke about this. At first I was like, I can wear my pajamas all day, and I'm going to hang out with the dog, and it's going to be great. And so then I found pretty quickly that I needed to set some rules for myself. Like, you cannot sleep in super late, no matter how bad you want to. I make myself leave the house at least once a day, just so I see people, because I started realizing, like, I've just spent 5 days with the dog, and like, I'm now agoraphobic and socially awkward, so like, we need to fix that. So yeah, leaving the house once a day is a rule. I have to get dressed every day, no wearing pajamas, right? So I had to try and impose a little bit of structure on myself, to keep from, it's 3 o'clock in the morning, haven't talked to people, there's paint all over the house, everything's just a disaster. I was trying to avoid that. But it is, anytime I start to get frustrated or upset about anything, I try to remind myself that, like, I get to do something that I really love, and I'm lucky to be able to say that, and so I probably should not complain, and I should just get back to work.
Right. And I think that's another aspect too, is like doing something for work that is something that you do for fun can lead you to do it 24/7. So managing your own like personal time becomes its own kind of project.
That's an excellent point. Jono and I have this conversation a lot, because I am very bad at that, especially if he's traveling for work. Like, I will just get up and work on creative stuff all day until I go to bed, and just do it every single day. Like, there's always something that I want to do. And so it gets a little, I don't know if unhealthy is the right word, abnormal maybe, I don't know. I don't have a good way of explaining it, but it's just like, I like doing it. So it's not like, I don't know, oh, I'm gonna watch TV. Like, I would rather draw something. Or like, oh,
Right.
I'm gonna clean the house. No, I would rather draw something. So yeah, it gets a little problematic. I'm not very good at that balance. That's okay.
Yeah. So when people ask what you do for fun and your response is like, I do the same thing.
Yeah.
I do the same
And
thing
I've
for
actually
work.
had interviews where I've said that, and John was like, you know what though? I don't, like, say you're on a bowling team or something, because you can't just, it makes it sounds a little better. And I'm like, I know, but I'm just the way I am. That's all right.
Yeah. So, working with so many various clients, and potentially when working with like other designers and stuff, I know that one topic that comes up is imposter syndrome. And I know that I've experienced this when you feel
Yes.
when you feel that like everyone in the room is the smartest person in the room except you, right?
Right. What is that? Do you know what's so crazy about that? I was actually at an event a few weeks ago, and a very dear friend of mine brought that up. And it was like this aha moment, because I've definitely suffered from that. And it sort of is this sinister thing because you think you're the only one, right? And like the more people I talked to about it, the more people were like, oh, I have that, and I'm struggling with that. And how do you deal with that? Um, and the crazy thing is, everybody that said that, it, like, if I had to describe these people to you, I would say like they're so smart, they're so kind, like they're so good at what they do, that I was just like floored that they were suffering with, like, from this. Um, and so that's kind of crazy to me. I definitely get that way. I think the only thing that helps me is that I just keep making stuff, if that makes any sense. So even at the time, if I'm like, everything I'm making is awful, I feel better because I'm making it. So in a way, it just kind of like works itself out, I guess. But yeah, I don't know. That's such a sinister thing to deal with. I don't know.
Right.
That blows my, like, that's crazy to me that you would have that, because when I see the stuff that you do, like, to me, it looks perfect. And there's not one thing that I would change about it. So that's crazy to me that you would say, like, yeah, I get that sometimes. So
Yeah,
what do you do to work through it?
I guess I guess a lot of it for me comes from the thing of I went through a time where I would make something and then a week or a month later I would see it again and say, that's terrible. Like I'm totally bored with that piece, or like, here's a bunch of things that I did wrong. But I think part of it comes from just being so intimate with your own work, that you see things that you perceive as mistakes that might not actually impact the experience of other people seeing it.
I agree with that.
If that makes any sense.
That does make sense, and I agree with that.
I think the other half of it is probably just that, and I'm not sure like where this abnormality comes from, but just having like an abundance of respect for other people in your field. And
Oh, yeah, that's a big one. So, like, expanding on that, here's the sort of mental gymnastics that I go through. So, like, on one hand, I know that I'm good at what I do, and I've worked very hard for a very long time to be able to say that. And, like, I'm comfortable saying that, okay? But then on the other hand, I think, well, who is, I don't know, like, one of the most well-known creatives working today in the entire world, right? Like, whoever that person is that's at the top, I will look at them and think, well, if I'm not them and I don't have their career, then I'm not doing as well as I should be. And like, anything less than that absolute pinnacle is failure, which is crazy, because you can always, like, what is the saying of, like, you can look ahead and see who's ahead of you, but you can always look behind you as well, and there's people right across the spectrum. So just because you're located here on the spectrum doesn't mean you're a failure. But like, I have a really hard time with that, because I'll find somebody who's more successful than I am, and I'll think, well, I'm not that person, so I'm not doing good enough, which is crazy. Like, that's exhausting. Like, you can't keep doing that. But
right. And I guess part of it too is not even necessarily who's on top, but just people. There's so many people in the field doing so many different things. So you see somebody's work that you really admire, and they're doing something cool that's different from what you're doing, but you're like, man, that's even better than what I'm doing. But in fact, it's just different. It's in a different direction.
I agree with that. And the other thing I struggle with is I'm going to use the oatmeal as an example, right? Everybody knows the oatmeal. So what fascinates me about his work is that, so if you just looked at the illustrations out of context with no words, you would look at it and you would think like, oh, that's kind of cute, but it's not maybe the most beautifully rendered thing I've ever seen in my life, right? But then when you put it together with the content, it's hilarious and it's great and it's amazing and he's doing so well because of it, and rightfully so. But so then I struggle with this balance of like the content and the meaning as well as the visual aspect of it. Because I think I don't really have a balance there and I'm working on it. So that's another sort of, I don't know, layer to the neuroses maybe.
Yeah. So yeah, it's being familiar with your own work and kind of comparing it to the work of people you admire who are doing something different but similar, if that makes sense.
It does make sense.
So yeah, I guess another facet of being a designer in this space is just being a designer in tech, I guess. I feel like in many ways, digital design in the quote unquote tech area, meaning like mobile wearables, emergent tech like that, is different from being in design in other areas, like print, for instance. So you have experience designing both for print and digital. So how do you kind of view being a designer in tech specifically versus other fields, I guess?
No, I think it's all sort of a little bit of a struggle while you're learning it. And I think there are so many times that I've looked back and said, like, how did I not know that? Or why did I make that mistake? But it's just like learning anything else, I guess. But it's also interesting because for a long time, I sort of wasn't in this tech space. And I felt like, the communities I was involved in or the websites that I visited, I was sort of just another creative among other creatives, which was great. And I learned a lot and it was a great space to be in. But then there was this sort of weird shift with Glass where all of a sudden I wasn't just with these creatives, all of a sudden I was in a new space. And there were different people doing different things, and it was sort of a little bit jarring, I guess. So now I feel a little disconnected from the creative community just because, there's not a lot of people working in this space. So I have a hard time sort of reconciling that. But I will say, I feel very lucky to know some really good people. Like, for example, I've sent you stuff. Like, here, can you take a look at this and give me some feedback? Like, that to me is invaluable. I do not know what I would do without that. Like, that's a lifesaver for me. So I'm thankful that at least I sort of have the ability to, like, you've worked with this technology, you're familiar with it. So you know the sort of constraints and parameters we're trying to work in. Whereas somebody who's never even tried on a watch, like, it's not really helpful to me to send it to them because they're not going to understand, like, okay, well, why don't you add this? Or why do you do this? Or, right? Like, they have no idea how the technology works. So that's not very helpful.
Right. And I guess, like, as tech continues to emerge, it keeps producing these, like, new pockets of opportunity to kind of carve out a new thing.
Which is awesome. I love that. Also, I want to add that it drives me crazy that the Apple Watch has 2 sizes. So, like, listen, if people are making stuff for the Apple Watch, you have it easy because you have 2 watches. So, yeah, Android Wear is a little more involved.
Yeah, and I think that Android has kind of planned from the beginning to have all kinds of different displays, both in terms of different size displays and different shapes. So we kind of have the luxury of building on top of that, if that makes sense.
It does. And luckily, we know people that have one of every watch because we do not at my house have like 85 smartwatches. We have a lot. We have probably more than, than any other house in Johnstown. I would bet money on that. But that has been super helpful to us. So I should say, like, that's a great example of being in the tech community and like the kinds of things that people do that are awesome. Like if people hadn't volunteered, like, hey, do you need me to take a look at that? Right? Like, we would not be able to work on watch faces because we would have no idea how it would display or like what would happen or, you know, if there was a problem. So I have to say, I think that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, and I feel like Google Plus specifically for people who are working on Android is like an invaluable resource.
I totally agree with that. And it's so funny too because going back to um, comparing like creative spaces and tech spaces, I can't tell you how many times like another creative I know that is not really in the tech space will be like, "You're on Google Plus. You like Google Plus?" And I'm like, Google Plus is awesome because people give me feedback. Like people are like, it's just awesome, right? I love it. Like I need it to do my job, and like minds are blown because they have no, like they just don't get that.
Right. And even I work at Touch Lab in New York now, which is during the day. I work as a mobile designer there, working with all kinds of clients on their Android apps. And I've heard the same thing about Google Plus. Like, no, we don't use Google Plus. And I'm like, some of the apps that I work on with indie devs, like Nova Launcher, for instance, has a huge beta community of like something like over 100,000 users. So there's definitely invaluable feedback that you can get from that
I
community.
totally agree with that. And I would also add, like, if anyone is listening and is kind of like, but, you know, or their people are mean or whatever, like, I would compare it to any other social network, but with the added benefit of, like, I know when I post something, I get thoughtful feedback from people that make really good points. And, like, here's even another example. When I, 2 phones ago, when I was buying a phone, um, I couldn't decide between the Note 3 and the Moto X. And so I posted it online and I was just like, Google Plus, what do you guys think? Like, I'm just interested in hearing your thoughts and opinions. And there was somebody that I didn't know that was like, how dumb are you for posting this on the internet? And I'm like, no, 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 you don't get it though. Like, I know that there will be people that will post like really valid information on here. And like, I'm interested in what they have to say. And sure enough, that is what happened. So,
Yeah, it's very rare to see on the internet a multiple paragraphs long comment that ends up actually being very thoughtful and like actually helpful.
I agree with that. It certainly doesn't happen on Facebook.
Yeah. And so, yeah, like I know also Google Plus can be helpful for discovery of new apps. Like I know that I hear about most of your work through Google Plus. So like FitCat, for instance, and like other watch faces that you've done.
Oh, yes. Well, first of all, I probably overpost. I'm like, let's share everything, warts and all, because it doesn't bother me. But yeah, FitCat is actually a really good example of that because so if listeners do not know, that was the idea behind it was Chuki Chan, who's one of my favorite people ever. I adore her. She is wonderful. So she had the idea, she built it, and she needed the illustrations and kind of put the word out on Google Plus, like, you guys, does anybody know somebody that can help with this? And we happened to have a mutual friend through Women Tech Makers, actually, that put us in touch. And then once we started working on it, it was just awesome. Like, I really liked working with her. I can't say enough good things about her.
Yeah, and that's awesome that that connection was kind of fostered by not only the Google Plus kind of broader community, but also by women tech makers as well.
Yeah, Women Tech Makers, I feel like was something I didn't necessarily know I needed in my life, but now that it's in my life, it is invaluable to sort of have other women in the space that I am in and talk about experiences or things that have happened and know that you can just sort of speak honestly about it and it won't be, it just feels like everyone is there to support everybody else, which is amazing. And I'm really thankful to be a part of that because it is frustrating sometimes to be a woman in tech.
Right. And I know that a lot of tech companies are stepping up and having the conversation or taking the initiative to actually, foster the conversation and be receptive to women in tech. But I know that there are probably still experiences happening now that make it tough to be a woman in tech,
Oh,
right?
there definitely are. And I sort of mentally compare when things happen, I sort of compare it to, like, okay, would Liam, my friend, you, for example, have this experience? Or like, would Jono have this experience? So like, here's an example. Like, do you, Liam, get comments or emails frequently telling you how to do your job from people that you don't know?
I do not. That happens pretty much 0 times.
See, I get that happens not infrequently with me, and it's people that I don't know. I don't think that they are designers or illustrators or programmers. I'm not sure what they do because I usually don't know them, but I do get a lot of comments privately and sometimes publicly that are sort of like, you know, I'm trying to think of one that I. So I do also get sometimes things that are inappropriate that I could not repeat on the podcast. That happens less frequently, but it still reminds me, I guess, that there's a difference, right?
Right.
Like,
And that's so interesting because that, until you told me about that, like that experience would be invisible to me because it doesn't happen to me. So I would have no idea that that's going on.
right? It's odd. But here's the thing. I think that even having the conversation is hugely important. And I don't think it's something that, like, here's the solution and let's fix it overnight. But like, even to me as a person that deals with that, like, having people that I trust and that I can talk to is hugely important to me. Because that wasn't always the case, and that's very isolating to sort of have something happen or have someone send something inappropriate and you think like, did I do something? Or, why is this happening? Or does this happen to other people? And you just don't know. And now it's sort of like, all right, well, I'm going to block this person and I know to look out for them from now on and, moving forward. But
Right. That's so fascinating to me. I want to know, like, if these experiences are happening to other women who are sharing their work on Google Plus. I mean,
that's a good question. I know the people that I have talked to, and I don't want to name them or their experiences specifically because that's not really my story to tell, but I know that a lot of women deal with, like, they will post something to say, like, here's a problem that I solved, or here's a thing that I did. And frequently they will get feedback that is sort of like, oh, well, you should have done it this way, or why didn't you do it this way, or I always do it this way, or you're wrong for doing it that way. And there's sort of this flood of commentary of what you didn't do right. And it's not, it sounds really obvious, but words are very important. So there's a big difference between saying, like, oh, that's a really interesting solution and I'd like to talk to you about that, compared to, you're wrong and, let me help you with that because you obviously don't know what you're doing. Or,
right.
So I don't know, there's this like sort of nuance that gets lost and is sort of difficult to deal with, I think. But I do wonder, like, so first of all, I should say, like, I know of women that won't post their work or their projects online at all for exactly this reason, and they never have, and they say, like, I don't want to deal with that and I know it would happen, and that breaks my heart because, like, that's kind of holding them back in a way, that they're not able to share this stuff or sort of become an expert on these subjects because nobody knows that they're doing it because they are reticent to share what they're doing. So that's heartbreaking. But then I also wonder, is this across the board at every level? Is it, do women in charge of departments at Google that share stuff on social media, like, do they deal with this? Like, I guess that they do, but I can't speak to that experience. I don't know. But at the same time, I have to say I know a lot of people that are sort of in prominent positions that have a lot of respect and have a lot of weight to what they say, that will call people out that are doing, I guess, unacceptable things. And I've seen people say, like, you know, hey, why would you say that? Or why are you acting that way? And it's endears them to my heart, because I think that's, I mean, what else can you do but say, like, that's not okay,
Right.
don't do that.
Right. So kind of having the community self-moderate and
Exactly.
and it is, you know, when the community doesn't do that and things are allowed to go on, it's really harmful, because if you aren't able to share that work, you know, sharing your work and getting feedback is such a powerful tool. Since we have the internet, you know,
Right.
like you can share with everybody, and actually get helpful feedback that helps you grow professionally and, you know, improve your skills at what you're doing. So yeah, not being able to share that is a pretty big deal.
I would literally be lost without the community, especially the people that I know online, helping me and giving me feedback. I would be so isolated. It would be terrible. Like, I literally would have a very difficult time doing my job. But even as another example, like, as something that recently happened, and I don't mean to pick on Apple, I promise. But at the tech event that they just had, everybody remembers where they had the big photo of a woman up there and they photoshopped her to be smiling. So here's an example, right? Jono comes home for lunch and I tell him, like, oh, that was such a social faux pas. And he was like, I don't understand, why was that bad? Because he has a totally different experience than I do, right? And so I'm like, you don't understand. Women constantly are told that they should smile by people that don't know them. And it's creepy and it's not okay. And he was like, are you serious? And I'm like, yes, this is a thing that happens constantly, all the time. So first of all, that's problematic. But then second of all, you have this major tech company committing this social faux pas in front of how many people? And I have to think, if there would have been one woman on that team, she would have said, you guys, this is a bad idea. Please don't do that. Like, change your words, change the you know, the demonstration, do something else, because this is going to resonate really badly with people, and females especially. So I think that's like, that alone is a great reason for having diversity on a team.
Right. And that's a great example too. And even more so because that's the kind of thing that actually does happen. Like, that demonstration would be reality at an agency,
Right.
when they're publishing that. So
Exactly. And that's not, I mean, I've seen tons of examples of stuff that I'm like, there was not a woman on the team, because if there was, that never would have gone to press, or that never would have been approved. And I'm not saying, like, that's not somebody's fault that they don't know that. That's not their experience, and that's okay. But I think, you know, it just highlights why it's important to have different opinions and different kinds of people on teams, so that you can avoid stuff like that. Especially if you're marketing to, like, millions of people, right? Like, you
right,
don't want
exactly.
to offend half of them.
Yeah. And that goes back to the, you know, the value of being able to share even when you're in progress, which I guess a major tech company probably can't do. You know, they
Right.
can't put out what they're working on publicly ahead of time. But, you know, for those of us that can, it's hugely helpful to catch those things that might otherwise be invisible to us.
Yes, I agree with that.
So, yeah, but I guess that probably wraps it up for this episode, right?
I think so. We covered a lot.
Yeah, we did. I feel like we probably need to reconvene sometime for another episode to keep the conversation going.
I think that's an awesome idea. Sign me up. I want to do that.
Awesome. Well, yeah, until next time. I'll see you later.
Sounds good. Thank you. It's good. Thank you. It's good. Thank you. It's good. Thank you.